Hello and welcome to the Road Monkey podcast and season 7. My name is Kevin Pickard. We're here to explore those that challenge adversity, follow their dreams and often think a little differently from the status quo. Over the next 8 weeks we're going to be exploring the world of sport, from Olympic and Paralympic stars to world-class coaches to wider stories about the power of sport. Make sure you're following us across the social media platforms, and once you finish today's episode, if you enjoyed it, please share it with one person in your network. We would really appreciate it. Our guest today has worked across a range of roles in the sports and education sector, has overcome cancer and carried the London 2012 Olympic torch. It's a wonderful story and we really hope you enjoy it. So we're going to get straight into our 49th episode of the Road Monkey podcast and our first guest for season 7. Sarah Mortiboys, exploring the power of sport in society. Hello and welcome to the show, Sarah. How are you doing?
I'm really well, thank you. Really well. All is wonderful in the southwest. So yes, really well, thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk with you today.
Well, thanks for connecting. It was one of our previous guests that actually put us in touch, and really excited to kind of explore your journey. But if you can just give our listeners and our viewers just a quick introduction as to who you are and kind of, I guess, an overview of your journey so far.
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Sarah Mortiboys, and in my current life, my current kind of working life, I'm managing director for Delalio Rugby Works. And we're an organisation that works with some of the most disadvantaged young people who've become disengaged from their own learning in education. And we use the power of sport to help them build their confidence, their self-esteem, their communication skills, and really help them re-engage with their learning, but with life in general. And I think as we emerge out of what can be only lightly considered to be a global crisis in terms of the pandemic, I think organisations like Rugby Works are in real demand to help young people reassess and reestablish and recover and reinvent their lives. So I look after that organisation. In terms of my journey, I'm passionate about the development of young people. Always have been, actually, even since I was kind of a teenager. You know, I did all of the things that you would do in terms of Camp America, youth work, volunteering, all of that kind of stuff. And I think what that gave me was a real sense of the fact that we do have quite a significant divide in society. And actually, we have a responsibility as leaders, educators, people who really want to help and support young people to help that gap close, and to help all young people have the right, because it is a right and it is an entitlement to have the best possible start for them to go on to have a successful and happy life. And that really is the reason I get out of bed in the morning and the thing that motivates and drives me. So yes, did that for a while and then went into local authority, got involved in building leisure centres and that kind of stuff, which was great fun, great riot. And then joined Sport England, and that was quite early on in my career. I was in my 20s then, and it gave me a real insight into what it takes actually to establish well-founded lottery-funded projects, what that looks like, and the people on the ground that come together to make those happen. So did that for a few years, and then realised that actually, even though that was a great experience, didn't really know very much. Still quite young, and needed to go off and kind of cut my teeth in the real world a little bit, so that I felt that I had good experience and good knowledge to pass on as I got older. So I retrained, took the decision to retrain, and I became a PE teacher, and absolutely adored my years of teaching. Worked in a very challenging school in Gloucester City, and became, although that's in the leafy Cotswolds, it was real pockets of deprivation, and worked with some incredible young people who I remember sitting on corridor floors, convincing young people to go into maths, and really talking to them about, what they wanted to do with their lives and how they wanted to develop and the challenges that they faced. And I think I found through the medium, the mechanism of sport, a way of igniting confidence and aspiration in young people that actually very little else can. So then became an assistant head. So looked after pastoral care for quite a long time, went on to be an Ofsted inspector, and really got heavily involved in kind of the infrastructure of school and education, and loved that. Then I headed down to Cornwall, because I'm actually Cornish. I headed down to Cornwall and taught there for a while. Was very much in love with teaching surf lifesaving on Godrevy Beach and everything else that goes with it. And then realised that Cornwall was quite a long way from the rest of the world. Not that that is a bad thing, but felt that I needed to cut my teeth a little bit more in the city. So I actually came up to London in 2012. And that was really born actually on the back of the Olympics, and born from the fact that we as a nation had that moment in time to use something as powerful as the Olympics. And we will probably only see that once maybe in our lifetimes, maybe. So I think from my perspective, I wanted to use that and grab hold of it, and set up an organisation in South East London to work with primary schools predominantly to help them develop their PE and school sport offer. So whatever that looked like for them in terms of competition in school, to curriculum, to leadership across whole school, what actually the power of sport could do to help those young people. And that was a real labour of love for me, and did that for about 5.5 years, and came to the end of that journey. And I do think that sometimes as leaders in the space, we have to recognise when our time comes to an end, and it's good to pass that baton on to somebody else, which is what I did. And the network still continues under the care of a wonderful gentleman called Wilson, who is great, and still continues to do great work. And then I took the step of moving into, I guess, the sport for development world, and left education, which was quite a shock considering I used to have 13 weeks off a year, and left education and went to support and help develop the Sport for Development Coalition, which is a coalition of organisations who use sport for good. And worked alongside some absolutely amazing colleagues, not just in terms of the people that ran those organisations, so organisations like Street Games, Street League, Coach Corps, Rugby Works, but also worked heavily with Sport England again, and Comic Relief and Laureus, which gave me a really valuable insight into how that policy world works. And how to really communicate and profile what sport can do for societal change and societal good. So did that for a while, and then the opportunity at Rugby Works came my way, and I've been with Rugby Works in 3 different capacities actually now for the last 18 months, since September 2019. And have really, which has been a really challenging period for obvious reasons. You know, we have gone through one of the biggest societal challenges that we will ever face in a generation. And I think that we're only really at the tip of the iceberg of understanding what that means for us as a society going forward. So yes, joined Rugby Works and now look after the day-to-day leadership and management of the organisation, and yeah, and absolutely love it. So that's kind of a bit of a whistle-stop tour, I think, of the chaotic nature of my career.
That was a very thorough answer, and it's given me so many different threads that I want to pull on. But I actually want to go, I guess I know we've kind of finished there at the end, but actually I want to go right back to the start, even before you dived into that world. Where did this fascination for sport and the power of sport kind of start to resonate with you? Was it at school? Was it, you know, through another PE teacher, or was it through like a different angle of sport that you did yourself?
I think this was probably, it's a really good question. I think there was probably a couple of moments in my life, both at different points actually, early on in my life, where I really started, sport turned my head, and I always wanted to be an artist. Sport was never the thing for me, and you know, I painted as a still do, and actually wanted to be either an art teacher or an artist in my own right, and that was always something that was that was, if you were to say, what did you want to do when you were a kid? I wanted to paint. And I think, but what I found at school, especially when I went to secondary, was I was actually really good at gymnastics. I was a gymnast, and I was actually very good at it, mainly because I had very little sense of fear and just threw myself into it. I was never particularly great at team sports necessarily, but gym, yeah, I was really good. And I had a very traditional PE teacher, Mrs. Castle, who now you would probably say would be one of those teachers that would be like, oh yeah, she's got her favourites because they're good at it. And as as an educationalist, I would absolutely want us to stay away from that. But she was an incredible teacher. And I remember we had a very traditional school gym. We had a big wooden bolt box. And this was a long time ago now, and I remember one particular moment in a PE lesson where we were doing some crazy stuff that was highly dangerous for gymnastics. I mean, you wouldn't do it now, you really wouldn't. And we had this terribly small gym, and we had a store cupboard at the back of the gym, and she used to kind of maneuver the vault box to a point where you'd have the longest possible run up if you stood right at the back of this store cupboard to give you that run up so that you could clear it without breaking any bones. And nobody would do this vault because it was pretty, we'd put there was a kid doing a headstand on it. It was a bit risky. And I remember thinking, no, I'm going to do it, and pushing myself right to the back of the cupboard and taking this long run up and clearing this. I mean, it was ridiculously high, clearing this vault and landing the other side and just thinking, oh, do you know what? I quite like this. And I quite like the feeling that it gives me. And I quite like the confidence that it gives me in myself. And then went on to do more and more and got very much involved in the sporting culture at school, was sports captain, everything else that went with it. And I absolutely adored it. And then I think there was a second moment as I went on to university where and I did a leisure management degree, and with elements within that was outdoor education. And I'd always done my Duke of Edinburgh's award at school, very lucky to have that opportunity, and then went on to do my mountain leaders and started doing, and I went to university in Cardiff and started doing a lot of work in the Welsh Mountains, started doing work with Outward Bound as a volunteer. And we had a group of young people come from, I'm pretty sure it would have been London, maybe an inner city area. And I was qualified then as a climbing instructor and had done quite a lot of work in it. And took these young people to the top of a mountain called Cadaridris, which is in Wales. And it's not a particularly difficult climb. It's not terribly difficult. There's some elements on it that are, but the wonder that you saw in these kids' faces, the fact that they were just felt like they were sat. Well, I still remember one young person saying to me, and this is a good 25 years ago now, saying to me, I feel like I'm stood on top of the world. And that still puts hairs on the back of my neck, to think that the natural world and the fact that you are involved in a sporting activity to enable you to access that can give that wonder to a young person is pretty cool. And I just think from my perspective, I was then sold. And I was like, okay, this is kind of what I want to do now. I want to bring that wonder and that enlightenment and that feeling of freedom to young people, which is why, although I said, chaotic career, it still has had that golden thread run through it. And that's really to give that difference and make that difference to young people's lives.
So if we look at that thread, I guess that runs the whole way through it, like you just mentioned there. Well, I find it fascinating speaking to people from all different aspects of sport that they can usually pinpoint a school childhood memory of something that really got them hooked. But I guess across your career, you must have had moments through different lenses. So actually, are there any particular ones that stand out, from the working side of things that actually you look back and go, that was a turning point for me, whether it was good or bad, but actually they just stand out in your memories?
Yeah, I think so. And I think most of my most of the decisions that I've taken in terms of my career have had that golden thread running through, which is that development of young people and that raising that aspiration in them. But I also am a big people person, and there's been people in my career and who are still in my career who I've met along the way who've really given me kind of this crystallization and this opportunity to really think about what my next steps would be on that journey. And I think for me, there are a couple of people that have really resonated with me. And one of them was a previous head teacher when I came to Southeast London. His name's John. John was the head of Bacon's College, which is in Southwark. And we met, and I have never met a head teacher who was so calm and so clear and so unashamedly passionate about the development of young people. And I couldn't fault him in his approach, couldn't fault him in the way that he spoke to young people, the way that he supported and developed the school. And I think for me, I had the enormous privilege of working alongside him to develop the PE network, which was based out of Bacon's. And he gave me significant challenge, absolutely. And you always knew there was only one point that I had got myself in trouble with John. And you always knew when that would happen, because you'd go into his office and it would either be, do come and sit on the sofa, or there'd be a chair out at the top of his board table. And the chair at the top of the board table only happened to me once, when I pushed the boundaries a little bit too far on some decisions that I'd taken, and had my kind of myself reined back in again. But he really fostered that element of ambition and creativity, and that, I think, is incredibly rare and really important. I think I've only really experienced in my career that element of trust and an element of go get them, probably a handful of times with a handful of people. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that our sector has, is that element of, let's just try stuff. Let's just see how this pans out. Let's just take some risks, and maybe we might fail 9 out of 10 times, but that one time that we are successful, we change a young person's life. And he really gave me the confidence and helped me develop my own sense of confidence, actually, and gave me the freedom and the creativity to really develop something that was quite special to us. So I think for me, it's people that you meet along the way that are part of your journey. And I'm sure everybody and all, your listeners would resonate with that. If you really think and reflect, there are people that you meet that really do change your perception of yourself, but also the perception of your working world around you, and give you that opportunity to go off and really change the world, I guess.
Well, you mentioned there, I guess, around changing perceptions on, what you can do for other people's lives and that sort of thing. And I know when we spoke prior to this, you kind of were happy to share, actually, you've had some personal challenges along, the last, or your journey as a whole, and that has actually changed your perspective on, let's go wider than work and actually just life itself. And I'm just keen to kind of explore that a little bit, because I think, we spoke about another podcast that we'd listened to recently by Joe Mullen, who experienced something very similar. And actually the response to that situation is so powerful. And I think that, mixed with the sporting journey you've been on, then actually where you've got to and how you approach life actually becomes so much clearer.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and I'm more than happy to share it. I think I've had a couple of life-changing moments as the years have gone on, but I think probably the one the one that we're talking about, and the one that resonates most, is the fact that I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that came as a phenomenal shock, to be honest. It came at a point in my life when I was heading back down to Cornwall. I just got divorced. I decided to step away from being an assistant head and go back into being a head of PE and teaching, because I actually missed the contact with young people. And it really turned my world upside down. And I don't think that we talk necessarily as society openly enough about the challenges that you face if you're in that position. And frankly, 1 in 2 of us will get cancer at some point in our lives. This is not uncommon. It is not a unique disease at all. And yet what I found at that time, and still to a certain extent now, is that it's very much, people just don't talk about it. It's just one of those things, and I think the experience that it gave me, and it gave me this sense of the fact that I needed to face it head on, and to be told, quite frankly, that, to ask the question of, am I going to die? And to be told, we don't know, is pretty punchy to receive at any age, let alone when you're 32 and you think that you've got your entire life ahead of you. And that actually really makes you pause and think about the things that are important to you. Think about the levels of tolerance that you have and the levels of acceptance that you have of the world around you. And that journey takes a while. And I think what's interesting about cancer is that it kind of parachutes you into this world where you have a very intense period of treatment. I mean, I was in treatment I was very lucky in that I spotted my cancer early. So I had the tumor removed. Then I had chemotherapy. I got a year 11 kid to shave my head, which was hilarious. She thought that was the best thing that had ever happened to her. And I had the long locks that I've got now. So she just took the whole lot off in a PE lesson. I'll never forget that, actually. I must have been completely insane to let a kid do that. But I did. And then had radiotherapy and a drug called Herceptin, which I was very lucky to be able to access when I lived in Cornwall. So that period was about 2 years. And so you're in this kind of machine, which is, treatment. I go to hospital, I see my oncologist, I see the team, all of those things. And so you're on this little hamster wheel, and it actually becomes quite nice in the nicest possible way. You have this lovely routine and you meet some great people, and you see other people not make it the other side, for sure. There were people that I met along the way that are now no longer with us, which is deeply sad. But I think it gives you that sense of you're part of something else as you move forward. And that's the way that I approached it. So I was kind of, to use a sporting context, I was on the cancer team. And then you come out the other side of it. And in terms of that treatment, and it almost feels like you've been dropped. You're on the bench now. And you're a bit like, well, hang on a minute. Well, what do I do now? Like, how do I come out the other side? What are the mechanisms that I use? How do I learn to cope with that? And I think that I spent quite a long time reflecting on that and trying to rationalize that in my own mind. And I came to the conclusion, and I still think about it every day to some form of extent. It doesn't play on my mind. And most of the time, I think about it in the sense of, wow, what an opportunity that was. It completely transformed my view of life. It changed me beyond recognition. You probably wouldn't have liked the previous Sarah. I absolutely am comfortable in my own skin now, and I wasn't previously. I see life in glorious technicolor most of the time. And don't get me wrong, I still get deeply irritated by stuff, but it's usually superficial. And I think that's an incredible gift and exposure that I've had. And I'm incredibly grateful for it. And I would never take it back. And even to the extent, and I said that to somebody the other day, and he said to me, well, what if it hadn't have worked out? And I can honestly say, if it hadn't have worked out and I wasn't here now, I still wouldn't have taken it back, because that was my trajectory and my life experience. And that was the path that has been given to me to make the best of. And I think one of the best opportunities that cancer gave me was that I was actually a 2012 torchbearer. And that 300 meters of a little Cornish road just outside Marazion in way down west in Cornwall, was unbelievable experience to have had. And I was actually nominated by my oncology team at Trelisk in Truro, which I didn't know. And I didn't know I'd been nominated. And they all turned out to watch me. And cancer gave me the opportunity to carry an Olympic flame. I mean, what? That's crazy. I'm just a PE teacher. That's all. And I think from my perspective, and I do think that other cancer, and I don't consider myself to be a survivor at all. It's an experience that I had that I came out the other side of. And I think that if you would talk to other people who have experienced it, they would probably say similar things. You know, this realization of what is really important to you in life, this realization of the fact that you become very tolerant on the surface, but sometimes quite intolerant of kind of people who complain or perhaps don't necessarily have had the same exposure opportunity as you. So I think that when you have big ticket items like that come into your life, the way in which I approach them now is that, okay, this is going to be a challenge, but what opportunity and what learning can I take from it? How can I use it to benefit my life and benefit those that are around me? And that's the way that I viewed that experience, and pretty much every other challenging experience that I've had since.
That's what I was going to ask, I guess, following on from that, because that must have given you such a shift of direction, if you like, that everything that came after that probably looked different to perhaps what it could have looked like if you hadn't had that experience. So do you think both your working and your personal experiences since have probably been, I know you used the term technicolor, but actually richer experiences because you've seen how much of a gift some of those, in our heads, challenges could actually be, but you actually go, hey, great opportunity to learn, develop, make a difference every single time you come up against something.
Yeah, I think so. And I what I would say is it's not, I paraphrase it as that's the way that I act every time. It's not. I still think, oh God, really? But I do think that it gives you, and I do have to call on that. It's not it's a learning, it's a training myself to behave like that, because there is a default that you go back to, for sure. But I do think that that when I do face challenge, and I face challenge quite significantly, both in my personal and working life, or as everybody does, not just me, everybody does. There are tactics and learnings that you take from that type of experience that really just help you process and view things in a very rational and calm way. Now, that is not the normal state for me. I am an emotional woman and I do get very passionate about things. But what I've learned is to harness that in the direction that I would need to, in order for me to be the most successful at whatever challenge or conversation that I'm having. And I also think that it's enabled me to be very, and this with colleagues would say, colleagues and friends would agree, I would think, very authentic in the way that I view life, and very kind, actually, kind to myself, but also kind to others. Because I think that it's very easy in our world to be critical, and it's very easy to be unkind. We've developed, and this is just my opinion, but we've developed in society a way of just not seeing necessarily always the good in everything, and there is this element and undercurrent of criticism. I feel that actually, if you wake up in the morning, you think, I'm just going to be a kind person today, then in my opinion, you're winning at life if you're doing that. And I really try to have that as a conscious way of being now. Because you don't know what the next day is going to unfold in front of you, and isn't it better to be in a state of general happiness, general kindness, general caring and nurturing for those that are around you, than perhaps not to be in that state, I think.
I find that fascinating because I'm getting quite a few shows in now, and I cast my mind back to season 2 and 3, and we had a couple of guests on, one called Damien Hughes and one called Jake Humphrey, and they both now run their own podcast, and they spoke quite extensively around you have a choice in how you think, and actually, what's the point in not thinking positively? And I think, not having had the same experience as you, but having had some challenging experiences with cancer and family over previous years, I can certainly now get to a point where, within reason, not the extreme, but within the majority of circumstances I come across, I am finding the shred of positivity within it, because it's kind of like, well, what's the point in actually just seeing the doom and gloom? Because you're going to feel doom and gloom. It's going to bring you down for an hour, a day, a week, and then you're still going to have to move forwards anyway. So why don't we just find the positive and move forwards, acknowledge the challenges. And one of my other guests talks about it as a record, and actually saying, look, accept that it's going to go around a few times, and then just take the needle off and then move on. And I think it's really powerful to hear that experience from somebody who's had such a diverse career, but actually the kind of things we're talking about here, I guess, are life reflections.
Yeah.
So moving on a little bit, I guess that must have obviously completely changed. We already talked about like your philosophy on life, but going into the role that you've been in now and kind of worked across the 3 roles within Rugby Works, how has that changed your day-to-day job in exactly what you do now? So if you can talk us through, I guess, some of the projects you do, and I guess pulling together all your passions and learnings so far, actually, what does that now look like on a day-to-day basis for you?
I think from my perspective at Rugby Works, I think that when I came into the organisation, we had some significant challenge. And as most charities and most third sector organisations have, as they develop and evolve. And I think from my perspective, what I relished about that and continue to relish about it is that as an organisation, we have developed this culture of being very agile and very responsive, and really understanding and taking the time to understand the world around you, and the impact and influences that are on young people's lives, and how really as an organisation we help them change their lives. We don't do it for them, because that's terribly arrogant, in my opinion, and actually not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to enable and help, and give scope for young people to make the right choices for them, not for us to point them in a trajectory and say, you must do it this way, because that would be very wrong. So I think as an organisation, with that ethos and putting the young person at the heart of everything that we do, we have become very agile, very fluid. Yes, we use rugby as a mechanism to engage. And yes, we predominantly work in education settings, and whether that's pupil referral units, alternative provision, special schools and inclusion units within mainstream, we're very much of the mindset of okay, we are going to come in and support you and develop that relationship with you to enable you to become the best that you can be. And therefore, our approach is very flexible, very creative in the way that it tackles those challenges. And with that, as an organisation, that really puts us in what I kind of like to call like the cliff edge, I guess, which is the cliff edge where you get a fantastic view. It's almost like, is the climb worth the view? You get this amazing view, but it's actually quite high risk, because you are on the edge. And I do feel as an organisation, we're on the edge of absolutely being fundamental to the development of disadvantaged young people's lives. And with that comes this real sense of wonder, but also real sense of responsibility and challenge. And as an organisation, I think we do recognise that, and we do recognise the responsibility that carries. So that approach, when we go into any form of partnership or project or whatever that might look like, if we have that in our mind's eye when we're making those decisions, then that puts us in a very fortunate position. I mean, an example of that is the relationship that we've developed with Coach Corps. Coach Corps are a phenomenal organisation that develops apprenticeships across the whole of the country for disadvantaged young people who want to move into sport and physical activity. We have, and I've wanted Rugby Works to have that relationship since I walked through the door on the first day. And it took us about a year to get to that point. And we now have an absolutely phenomenal apprentice that's with us, Grace, who will be with us for 15 months on her apprenticeship. And I don't mind saying I want to make sure we hang on to her, because she gives us insight and experience from a young person's perspective through lived experience, that as much as I would like to say that I'm still a young person, I'm not. And that for us as an organization is so important, to have that level of understanding, authenticity, and actual knowledge about what it takes to support and develop young people through their lives. And from a leadership perspective, the challenge then, when you are doing an outward facing conversation, is to really push back and say, no, we need funding for 10 years, because this is what it takes to enable those young people to get the best possible outcome for themselves. So hopefully that answers your question. I've just gone off on a bit of a tangent now.
No, it's great. And I think I really like, I guess, digging down into some of the different organizations that work in sport, because I know before we started recording, I mentioned a podcast I did back on episode 40 with someone called Julia, and I knew her from her job, but then actually, huge passion for sport and life. But then actually, when she opened up and told us her story about how sport would have a huge impact on her as a 10-year-old, you suddenly went, I get it. But it was a full journey to get there. And I think too often you see schemes or activities or whatever it is out there where it's almost quick, especially in the modern generation, everything's like last week. And actually it's you're seeing it in UK sport funding, this shift to kind of 12-year funds, and actually going, well, why is that important? Well, because some of these people are going to go on an 8 to 12-year journey to get to the high performance levels in sport. And then you kind of go, well, that doesn't just apply to elite sport. That applies to every human being. If you say to a 12-year-old, what do you want to be when you're older? Half of them will reply an astronaut, doctor, a nurse, whatever it is. And the journey of them walking into a university, an apprenticeship, college, whatever it is, job on day one at 18 is quite an up and down, journey. So to be able to look after them for a longer period of time, I think really not just adds value, but it recognizes that it is a journey. It's not just an isolated period of time. And I think you're the perfect example of that, to actually show, the different paths you've been through to get where you are. And I guess that kind of loops to the kind of question that I always try and finish on. If I went all the way back to, some of the people you're supporting, but on your life, you as a 10-year-old, and you could give yourself a message, what would you actually say to yourself now, knowing everything that's happened since?
I was thinking about this morning, and when I was reading through my notes, and I think it's a really lovely question. And I think for me, there's a wonderful poem by a guy called Derek Madden, which is called "Everything is Going to Be All Right." And I think if I was going to go back and see myself as a 10-year-old, heading into teenage years, I would just say to myself, everything will be okay. Because it will, because it has to be. And I think that's that. And it sounds like a really simple phrase, but when I think back to when I, was diagnosed with cancer, I was kind of like, well, either way, everything's going to be all right. So it's just a very simple ethos. And I've kind of used that. And I read the poem again this morning before jumping on the call with you. And I think that the way in which I have a very simplistic view of life. I really do. It's not particularly complicated or highbrow or anything like that. My view is that just be kind to yourself and others. And the view is that everything will be okay.
That's a really nice way to, I guess, round it off. And without jumping off on too much of a tangent, there was an audio book I listened to last year called Failure is Not an Option. And it just talks about how you'll make it work, whatever. And you dig down into the actual story, and it was wrote by one of the mission directors from the Apollo space missions. And they said, we are getting these people to the moon and we are getting them home safely. That is the only thing that's happening here. There's no other option. And I think there's quite a few people I've listened to who have had various, I guess, hurdles along the way, health and career wise. And they all reflect of, we get one go, make the best of it and it'll work out. And it's just really nice that you kind of finished with that kind of statement. So thank you so much for your time this morning, Sarah. It's been inspirational and really enjoyable to share some time with you.
That's my pleasure. Thank you.
A fascinating insight. Thank you again there, Sarah, for such an insightful story. Some really powerful stuff there about the value of sport and the impact it can have on people. That gets our 7th season underway. You can follow Sarah on Twitter, and we've linked her page in the show notes, along with all our social media platforms. The episodes will be coming thick and fast over the coming weeks, so make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on whatever you're listening to it through today. And if you've enjoyed today's conversation, please give us a quick review and share it with your friends. Next week, we are speaking to Paralympic star Andrew Mullen, just in time as he dives into the pool in Tokyo as he heads to his 2nd Paralympics. With 21 international medals to his name, including 3 Paralympic medals, Andy's experiences and insights from his time in paraswimming are absolutely fascinating. Hopefully you'll join us for that, and thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Road Monkey Podcast.